to start up this session, and we will, of course, welcome everyone who drops in one by one when they have finished their coffee. But so that we don't run late, we have to start. If I can we raise the volume a bit? Do you hear me?
Very well.
Very well, great. It's just you, Daniel. You're old. I am so honored to be the first session chair. So, yes, we should have an applause. We heard when we were in the other large room that now the scientific program begins, but I actually think now the scientific program begins. This is when we're going to hear all the papers. So today we have 4 exciting papers in this session, 3 research papers submitted and accepted to this conference, and 1 journal paper. And it will be like this. We will have 10-minute presentation by each paper author, and we will have maybe a minute or 2 for questions when we're changing the laptop. And then after that, we will have like a little panel where we will discuss questions. And I would really strongly encourage you, people in the room, because these are exciting papers, to listen with attention. So please do not answer your emails during this session. You can do that in the break. We have a long lunch break. And speakers, I would love for you to try to be present and listen with attention to each other as well. Because I would like to ask you later if you have any new insights that came from the other presenters. Okay, great. I was also told that I should, and I waited so there were many people in the room, to encourage you to visit the Disnovation booth. They're at the coffee area. You can't miss them. It's like a huge green booth out there. So Disnovation we're going to listen to later. I think it's today. They're on the OFF program. Art and Science. Brilliantly. Okay, so with that, I think actually we have to start. So I welcome up Willem Haast. He's presenting the paper Untangling the Relationship Between Degrowth and ICT. And the authors for that paper is Sergio España, Willem Haast, Nivard Johansen, and Daniel Parkman. Whenever you are ready, Willem.
So, this being an IT conference, the first thing that goes wrong is IT related. Let me just... Sobriety. Very exciting. Yes, right. I immediately regret the low resolution image, but wait, whatever. Hi, everyone. Very nice of you to attend my presentation on our paper, Untangling the Relationship Between Degrowth and ICT. My name is Willem Hulst, and this research is originally part of my master's thesis, which I completed last year at Utrecht University. Well, that's me, second over there. The same outfit is purely coincidence, but you can recognize me by my snail. The rest of these handsome devils are my co-authors, including Daniel Parkman, who's here with us today. Sergio was also my supervisor for this thesis. Now, why would we want to untangle degrowth and ICT, or the relation between those 2 concepts? Well, ask anyone, they'll probably say infinite growth in a finite world is a logical and practical impossibility. The effects of unfettered capitalist growth are each more noticeable each day. Degrowth represents a pathway out of the problems created by capitalism, based on an increased focus on well-being, which means, what we really need, instead of welfare, which might sometimes be what we want, meaning more money, or for companies, more customers, since under a capitalist system, it's grow or die. But what does this mean for IT? I would like to introduce you to the iPad equation. Some of you may know this. Developed by Ehrlich and Holdren in 1972, I believe. They relate or approximate environmental impact as a product of three factors: people, affluence, meaning money, and technology. Now, it's of course not a direct equation, and anyone who's studied math will probably cringe a bit at this, but it's a decent enough approximation. And what we've seen when we study degrowth research is that degrowth focuses on reducing the affluence factor, meaning that GDP growth, which has long been an indicator of, well, how good a country is doing, is no longer adequate, because we see that the complete and utter focus on this growth has disastrous consequences, not only for the natural environment by extracting resources and the like, but also on people, not just physically, but also mentally and spiritually. Now, this is a more traditional perspective of the degrowth community, that this focus on growth and more money leads to the increase in environmental impact. The societal perspective that we've perceived is that people tend to focus on the technology, the impact of technology. And this is not to say that they would like to decrease this technology impact. However, they would like to leverage this technology to reduce overall environmental impact by introducing more innovation. However, the clever among you have spotted the problem. If the underlying system does not change, technological innovation will only lead to more growth. It is simply a way to facilitate this growth while decoupling environmental impact from it, which we've heard in the keynote, if you paid attention there. However, empirical evidence does not suggest that this decoupling is at all possible. It has been tried, and it has failed. Now, our perspective combines the traditional degrowth perspective on reducing the growth part of the equation with technology, and especially ICT, because ICT pervades more and more of our daily lives and is, as such, instrumental to this growth imperative. While if we see them as separate, if we see them as separate concepts, then we miss what benefits the unification of the concepts might have for us. Now, how did we achieve the results of this study? We asked people. We asked people what they think, and we have a diverse set of participants. We held interviews and focus groups. The interviews were held with mainly degrowth experts, some of which had ICT knowledge, and focus groups among IT students. And we did what any good researcher does. We asked random people on the internet what they think. A boundless source of information, some of which is useful and some of which is, well, painful to read. But we asked a number of subreddits, communities on the website Reddit, and they held a semi-guided or unguided discussion on what they thought about degrowth and ICT. And we distilled from that a number of concepts, which were recurring trends and themes as expressed by the participants. Firstly, degrowth is a controversial term. As mentioned just before the keynote, it does not mean we're going back to the Stone Age, but people seem to think that it is. However, when the principles of degrowth are applied in context, they become much more attractive. I mean, who doesn't want to work less hours for the same amount of money? Oh, right. Techno-optimism leads to rejection of alternatives. Techno-optimism, the focus on the technology aspect of the IPAT equation, leads to people rejecting things like degrowth or its cousin A-growth as alternatives for alternative pathways towards a better society. Sticking to the status quo seems easiest. Limiting ICT in our daily lives is something to strive for. This means both direct interaction with ICT, meaning just how much you hold your phone in your hand, and indirect interaction. How many times a year do you purchase a new phone? how much redundant infrastructure is needed to run this ICT. However, one participant asked, what would this have done for Moore's law, where transistors double every 2 years, if we don't have a new phone every year? Who knows? High-tech solutions create high-tech dependencies. If you fight symptoms with high-tech solutions, but those high-tech solutions themselves are unsustainable, you still don't have a sustainable system. We need to think about this. And lastly, can and should ICT play a role in the degrowth scenarios? That very much depends on who you ask. If you ask me, yes. What does this imply? And mainly for research. Firstly, despite the terminology, degrowth might become a very popular concept, as the status quo is broken down more and more by the results of aggressive capitalist expansion. People are looking for alternate pathways out of this. And the envelope might shift, and degrowth might, from a radical idea, turn into a very acceptable idea. The relationship between degrowth and ICT is directional. We define two concepts, degrowth by ICT and degrowth of ICT. Degrowth by ICT being applying ICT to implement degrowth principles in other sectors, and degrowth of ICT being applying degrowth principles to ICT. However, there's a trade-off between both directions. If you degrow ICT, then the effects that ICT can have on other sectors are diminished. However, if you use ICT to degrow other sectors, you create high-tech dependencies. It is important to focus on the positive consequences of degrowth. People have very negative connotations by degrowth, with the term degrowth, and it is important to place the principles in context. Also, the degrowth community needs the voice of the ICT community and vice versa. I think degrowth and ICT experts can learn a lot from each other, and the intersections between the two concepts are very interesting to explore with further research. So, what's next? For us, well, we have more research on degrowth and ICT in the pipeline. We are expanding on the conceptualization of the relationship between degrowth and ICT, and how are these concepts represented in scientific literature. We also looked at how the conceptualization of this literature representation relates to what people find important, what I just told you. And for you, well, as I said, the degrowth community needs the voice of the ICT community and vice versa. The intersections between the two concepts are many, and they deserve to be explored. While not everyone might be a massive fan of degrowth, I think that concepts such as conviviality or not buying a new phone every 2 years, for some people might sound radical, but they are at the core of how we should rethink ICT. As our keynote speaker mentioned today, the digital reset requires building up ICT from the very foundation. And I believe degrowth principles can help with that. Now, if nothing else, I'd like you to take away a paraphrasing of a quote by Ivan Illich, who defined the concept of conviviality, which is to design tools for people and not for managers. Thank you.
Thank you, excellently. Do we have a student volunteer who could run around with the microphone? Because we can take 1 or 2 questions from the audience, while at the same time I would suggest that Leah comes up and plugs in our computer. Thank you. Do we have a question? Oh, up in the very top. Run. State who you are and your question.
Oh, do I have to? Okay, Adrian Friday, Lancaster University. Thank you for a really beautifully articulated presentation. Just in the view of the keynote this morning, some people are doing really well out of growth and would like to stay growing. So do you have any thoughts on how this becomes attractive for the big actors, the powerful actors, the very wealthy?
Well, the degrowth community believes that a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach should be combined in order to achieve any desired effects. So while both supply and demand need to come down, this is a consumer and a producer issue, I believe that awareness of other possibilities, as I mentioned, different pathways, and not creating high-tech dependencies are not inherent to big players or small players. They can be implemented across the board. And once this is more accepted, so when the techno-optimism has hopefully been reduced, I think we'll see an increase in the implementation of degrowth principles across the board. And I do agree that some players, some big players, will have to be forced more or less. This could be done through legislation or just, more direct action or research or whatever. I think everyone can contribute just a tiny bit towards making that a possibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should move on so that we have time at the end for the panel when we have all the presenters up here. I realized I made a big mistake. I didn't introduce myself. I was so focused on the papers. So just so you know who you can blame afterwards, my name is Elina Eriksson and I come from KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. But now we're going to welcome Lea Mosesso, and you're going to present the paper Obsolescence Paths, Living with Aging Devices.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
So I'm Lea Mosesso. I'm a designer, and I'm going to tell you about a qualitative study I did on smartphone software obsolescence with the team of the Digital Limits Research Project, which is Limite Numérique in French. So first, I'd like to do a little overview of the environmental impacts of the digital sector, and just to focus on the extraction and manufacturing phase, because according to the ADEME, which is the French Agency for Ecological Transition, almost 80% of GHG emissions come from the manufacturing phase. And also to produce all the material, we need a lot of material, and some are becoming scarce, and we need mines which have strong social and ecological impacts. So the extraction and manufacturing phase is, I think, the most important phase to focus on. And we focused on smartphones because it's the emblematic object of the digital sector. We replace them every 2.5 years in France. So what happens to them when we replace them? Some of them are reused, about a third of them, and it allows to extend their total use to 3.5 years. And the others, I put it to landfills or recycled, but recycling also needs a lot of resources, infrastructures, and we can't recycle a lot of materials contained in the smartphones. So for us, it's very important to extend the life of smartphones and preserve the hardware. And for that, there's repair. And there are more studies on hardware than on software repairs. So that's why we focused on software obsolescence. And according to a French government report, 20% of replacements are due to software issues or software obsolescence. And usually in those reports, it's with a very technical or legal point of view and only talking about updates. But we know the software issues are not just updates. And that's why we did an interview-based study on software issues not from a technical point of view, but from a usage point of view, which means we don't try to understand technically why a bug occurred, but the social consequences of this bug. And so we focused on software obsolescence and also the links between software and hardware issues. So our research questions were, what are software obsolescence factors and how they felt and experienced, how are obsolescence factors entangled, and what strategies do users develop in order to prolong their device's life. And we tried to answer those 3 questions by doing 18 interviews and with rather expert profiles, and it allowed us to have some interesting results, as we will see later. So to have the most complete description of the experience of obsolescence, I did a bingo card, and on each box, I put one issue that can be encountered, and I asked people to go through all the boxes and tell me about their experience with these issues. And it allows them to remember some problems that they encountered maybe many years ago, and also to focus on an accumulation of issues instead of focusing just on like the issue that triggered the replacement. And I also asked them to put the encountered issues on a graph to have a chronology and to have also the influence of each issue on the replacement of their devices. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about the results. I identified 3 main factors encountered among all the information I got. So storage saturation, updates, and malfunctions. I don't have time to go into any detail, but don't hesitate to ask me questions about it. And I also saw what I called obsolescence paths. So it's the links between the different factors and the entanglement of factors that lead to the replacement in the end. And it can be software factors, but also hardware ones and social ones, and factors that come from outside decisions from the manufacturers. And we can see that at the end of these paths, there's often social consequences, which means that it's sometimes it's not the issue in itself that leads to the replacement, but the social consequences of this issue. And also the accumulation of these factors discourages repair because people say it's not worth it to repair my phone. And then I also observed strategies used by informants to extend the use of their smartphones. So there were 4 strategies. The first one is repair and maintenance. It can be cleaning practices, and it can also be software repair practices, like rebooting the phone, which was used for a lot of different reasons. Also using the settings. For example, one informant had to disable the notifications because it was an issue for him. And updates that solve a problem that came with the previous update. The second strategy is bypassing. So it's finding kind of a backdoor way to use a function that's unavailable. It can be through apps and APKs and alternative OSs. It can be through hijacking of apps, so using an app not for the initial reason why the app is here for. For example, one informant used Snapchat to take pictures because the camera was only working on Snapchat with the front camera. And I also observed one person who modified the source code of his phone to be able to unlock the phone with the volume buttons instead of the power button, which was broken. The third strategy is the extension, so it's adding an object to the phone to be able to continue using it without changing too much their habits. It can be battery extensions and storage extensions like SD cards or online storage. And the last strategy is giving up. So it's when you recognize a certain value in your phone and you're ready to make trade-offs to be able to continue using it despite the issues. So it can be giving up some applications and features that are not working anymore. It can be changing their habits. For example, one informant had to do a rotation of 3 or 4 applications because he didn't have enough storage space to add them all at the same time. Then I also observed an overall decrease in usage of the phones, for example, when it's too slow, And some informants told me that it was a positive effect because they didn't use their phone as much as before. And also some people told me that they wanted to fully give up the smartphone and use a dumb phone instead. But here, they always faced their dependencies on the smartphone. For example, this informant needed WhatsApp or Signal to communicate with people in other countries, and he can't have these applications without a smartphone. And finally, when you give up some usage, there are usage transfers to other objects like computers or to people around you, and it creates dependencies and responsibilities. So, of course, there are a lot of limits to all these strategies, and I don't have time to go through every detail. So, to conclude, the contributions of this work are to have identified the feelings and experiences of software obsolescence, and not just with the technical point of view. Also, to have seen the various factors and the entanglement and the accumulation of different types of factors, and these strategies used by people to extend their life of smartphone. Thank you.
This was a lovely jump from the conceptual ideas down to very down-to-earth things that I recognize. Thank you. Do we have a question from the audience? And do we have someone running around with a mic? Yes.
So did you analyze the reasons why they didn't want to give up on their smartphone? Because I guess in the audience we assume that they don't want to buy a new smartphone, but I guess you mentioned some of them, but I don't know if you had a more comprehensive.
Sorry, I didn't. Hear.
Reasons why they would not want to give up the smartphones, why they kept attached to the old broken one.
It was mostly people who were aware of the ecological impacts, or just wanted to, they knew how, the person who modified the source code, he knew how the source code works, and I think it was also a challenge for himself to repair his phone as much as possible. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk.
Okay, so now we get to work your legs, because there was we take one more question down here, and then we will start the next presentation. This is a good day exercising for you. I think it's easier if you go from this side and then hand over the mic. And please tell who you are. I forgot to say that. Say who you are and then your question.
Thank you for a very good presentation, Dag Lundén, Telia Company. Just wondering, were there any respondents that had some doubt of leaving telephones due to the fact that there was sensitive data inside, and by that maybe not recycling it properly, or so, or hesitant to give it away, or so? I was wondering if you asked that question.
We didn't. I didn't ask a lot of questions about the end of life of the smartphone, so I don't have this information. Some informants gave their smartphone to relatives, but yeah, I don't know more.
Thank you. You may go sit down, and I'll call you up again. So our next paper is related. We are always on. Is that really necessary? Exploring the path to digital sufficiency in flexible work. And the presenter is Maël Madon. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Enilna. So we are indeed always on. Is that always necessary? So good morning, everyone. I'm Maël Madon, PhD student in third year in Toulouse. And I'm presenting a work that I've been doing in collaboration with Patricia Lago at the VU Amsterdam. So I hope that this gives another aspect on the three presentations that we had before, including the keynote. So my focus is on people's perception with their devices. So in order to avoid the growth in usage that we observe and that drives the growth of the right graph that you see on this slide. So basically, the main overall question is how much digital usage is sufficient? How much is just enough for my use? So if some people like Kate Wareth Donut, it's a bit asking the question, how do we use ICT to stay within the social foundation, having a little bit of ICT for everyone to perform their activities, but do not overshoot the environmental ceiling. So if people want to look more into the definition of digital sufficiency, you can read, for example, this paper of Tillman Zontarius and Lawrence Hilty, but I'm not going to dig into that right now. I'm going to explain you what we did to explore that question. So we did a very exploratory qualitative study. So we needed to zoom in a little bit from that big question that I showed you before. So we decided to zoom on professional usages of digital devices, and in particular, in the case of flexible work, because indeed flexible work and the ability to work from home and to not have to move to conferences or to work is a good promise of ICT, of diminishing emissions from the transportation sectors. But this flexible work relies a lot on the cloud. So now our question becomes how much in which cloud usage is sufficient for flexible work. So basically, we thought that first we needed to understand what do we do every day on our computers or phones, and which of those tasks are cloud-based. And then among those cloud-based tasks, which one are perceived as necessary by the people and which one are more superfluous. So in order to collect some data about this, we ran 3 focus groups in the Netherlands inside 2 companies, a very small company and a very small IT company and a large consultant firm. So we gathered in total 11 participants that were of different job position. Out of those focus groups, we had the video recording that we transcribed, and then from those transcripts, we identified codes out of each sentence where was associated a code. And then by discussion between the co-authors, we ended up with 12 themes, and then that all gathered in a code book that is available online as supplementary material for people that are interested. So I told you there are 12 themes, but I'm gonna talk about 5 of them because necessary, superfluous are 2 themes. So one is what we do on our computers, list of digital usage, work settings, necessary, superfluous, and then the tactics towards sufficiency. So the first surprise that we had was that basically everything that our workers were doing were cloud-based. It's probably due to the country where we run the study. It's a very digitalized country, the Netherlands, and also their job position and the tools that they were given by their company to work. But we were thinking that we would see more people still using their hard drive on their computer, but it didn't exist anymore, those people. At the same time, we kind of identified 3 main categories of cloud-based tasks. So first, the tasks that needs interactive, like constant internet connection. For example, when you're editing your Google Doc, and where you're in your Zoom meeting, you need your constant internet connection, otherwise it doesn't work. You also have tasks that needs the cloud, but that can be offline and then synchronized to the cloud, and then tasks that are completely off cloud, just only on your local drive. So we thought that first the suggestion towards sufficiency is to move from the first category to the second as much as possible, and then from the second to the third also as much as possible. So we investigated flexible work. So we also wanted to see if in people's experience, they were doing different things, whether they were at home or at work, if we were seeing different patterns there. And short answer, no. Our participants or digital nomads So their locations were highly interchangeable. People do the same when they are at home, at work, in our case. Thus, we still identified the reasons why they choose to go to work, or when they, for example, they choose to go to work or at a specific location. And once at a specific location, the differences, the slight differences they have in the work that they perform. And one case, one specific work location was different than the others is the case of train, because people do not do online meeting in the train. They tend to focus on, for example, reading emails, reviewing documents, so more individual tasks. And also one participant reported that she actually enjoyed doing that. 1 hour a day. She was commuting. She was commuting by train. So to have this time for her. So we thought that an important thing to go towards more sufficiency in a professional environment is to plan ahead for quality work in the appropriate environment, and also that sometimes constrained environment actually allows people being productive on individual tasks while reducing the digital usage to the essential. All right, we also asked the participants tasks by tasks. Do you think this is necessary? What is necessary in this task to understand the nature of the necessariness, if you want? So here we focus on online meeting because that was, for some people, 80% of their time that were spent, of their work time spent in online meetings. So first on the left column, people say that online meeting is great. It saves time. It allows to keep human contact. It's way easier to arrange. Also, they like to have camera to still see facial expressions. But at the same time, they did report that they were having too many meetings, that the meetings were sometimes too long and not efficient anymore, that you tend to have recurring meeting every week with people, but they're not driven by any agenda. And also that you have 50,000 apps for running your meetings, whether it's Teams or Zoom, and this is also not particularly necessary. So I think it's important to understand the nature of the service that is rendered by a task in order to choose best the tools to perform it, and so what should be focused on for sufficient use. The last result and contribution of this work is the identification of what we called tactics towards sufficiency from those focus groups. So we found 48 such tactics. I will present you 4 of them. So one I already talked about: use local off-cloud solutions if the work doesn't need to be shared. For example, at a company level, giving your employee lower quota on the mailbox side to reduce the number of servers that are needed for the mailbox, turning off the video during an online meeting, and also an interesting one, which is putting less restrictions on professional phones so people do not end up having one personal and one professional phone. All those tactics, we categorized them into categories. I invite you to look at the paper. So one that are directly towards human behaviors, human-oriented, those that are more targeted to the software, so system-oriented, and then context-oriented that are more, systemic. I also want to point out that not all the tactics have the same impact, and that we did not try to quantify that impact, though this is something that we are doing now for future work, but we can't say right now at this point if which tactic is more impactful. So thank you for your attention. In this work, we went and talked to participants, and we were surprised to see that they were both all their tasks were cloud-based, and that their tasks were mainly independent on their work location. We also identified that digital sufficiency had some resonance in them, but that they kind of did not know that needed more concrete suggestions. And also, we ended up with this list of tactics to sufficiency that we want to give for the community to use. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Mael. Already many people's hands are... This is always the case when you're hosting a session like this. People are slow in the beginning to put up their hand, and then you kind of get warm in your clothes and you want to ask questions. Please state your name and your question.
Okay. Hi. First, thanks for the wonderful presentation and the interesting insights. I'm Gabriel from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And I wanted to ask you, based on your methods and in your opinion, how generalizable are the results of your research, like in a scale from some IT firms in the Dutch society to a global scale? And what would be the future prospects to make them more generalizable?
The results are completely ungeneralizable. That was the short answer. It's qualitative research. We had 11 participants. We were in one specific country, 2 specific companies. Though I think that applies to many, at least IT or very digitalized company in the Western world. But indeed, we would be very interested to run this study, for example, in other countries, but even European countries, for example, I don't know, Italy or Spain, that have a lot of like difference in terms of digital connection. But like the point was not to generalize anything. The point was to get insights and then to start working on those insights.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and our student volunteer chose well. Thank you.
Hi. The tactics that you mentioned, do you think we could come up with a framework for industry-specific, something like a framework than tactics?
Yeah, I mean, those tactics, so you saw there are plenty. It's not a final version either. I mean, there are a lot of things that are lacking, but it's a first step. And I think before coming to such a framework, I think what would be important is to understand which one require a lot of sacrifice, if we can call it like this, from the people, and also what impact do those tactics have on their on people's life, in order to then maybe be able to give an answer and give concrete suggestions to company or flexible workers. Sorry if that doesn't completely answer your question, but that's the answer that I would give.
Thank you. You may sit down. Brilliant. Now we have the conference journal first paper. So for those of you who are new here, this is a possibility that if you publish a journal paper before the conference, you can submit it to get it presented at the conference. So we have the paper Establishing the Planetary Boundaries Framework in the Sustainability Reporting of ICT Companies, a proposal for proxy indicators, the longest title also in this session. And presenting it is Jennifer Erlandsson, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have to figure out how close I need to stand. So I'm Jennifer. I work at Ericsson as climate action lead. But before all that, I did my master's at KTH, and I have a background in environmental engineering. Yeah. So for my master thesis, I wrote about this topic and had Matthias and Pernilla Bergmark, Matthias is sitting right there, as my supervisors. And then after that, we added to it, we refined it, and we published it in the Journal of Environmental Management in December. So there you have some background. And I heard before that not everyone is familiar with the planetary boundaries. And there's a lot of discussions right now about net zero and climate change, and everyone is here and knows that it's a super important topic, but it doesn't solve all our problems. And the planetary boundaries have been defined as 9 ones by Johan Rockström and others, with a safe operating space that we should very much act to remain within, and we haven't done great. So in this picture, you can see the green section, which is this safe operating space, and we have transgressed a lot of these boundaries. And during the time that we wrote this paper, we actually transgressed a few more. So we're not, doing a really good job. So my question and the aim of this paper was then how are we going to exist within the safe operating space if we do not take the planetary boundaries into consideration in our decision making? And we aim to help companies do that by defining proxy indicators that can be used by companies to report on indicators that are founded on the planetary boundaries framework and report on them over time to see that they're reducing their impact. And doing this, we had like 3 main steps. So first we have a literature review where we went through more than, or maybe I should say, went through more than 200 articles, but also complementary gray literature and some internal Ericsson reports, and but mostly external information. And then we also had an additional review to complement biodiversity, because it's critical, but it's also very complex. So that needed some extra work. And then we had some interviews with Houdini Sportswear. They have done something similar, but in the clothing and apparel context, while we were focusing on ICT companies. And then we also talked to Future Earth. They have done quite a bit in this area as well, but also not in the context of ICT companies. And then we also had internal interviews with Ericsson, to test these proxies that we defined. And yes, and then to the most important part, the development of the proxies. So we had 2 main criteria for this. Firstly, the proxies should be based on the planetary boundaries framework. And then secondly, they should be practically implementable by ICT companies so that they can actually be used in practice. And then we also defined the spatial and temporal granularity for each of these proxies. So how often they should be reported upon, but also at what scale. So for example, should it be reported on at each company site, or is it enough if it's just the total company picture, or anything else in between? So now I'm going to show you a picture. It's quite a lot. I'm not going to talk about all of the proxies. I don't have time for that. But to summarize, we defined 1 to 3 proxies for each planetary boundary that can be measured and reported upon over time. Let's leave it at that. And then to test out these proxies, we try them upon 1 ICT company, the one I work for, Ericsson, to see what are we doing right now. And I tried to make it easy to understand, but I'm not a graphical, I don't work with that. So the colors here, they represent green is sufficient, like everything is up to date, perfect. You could apply the proxies right away. Yellow means that there is minor refinements needed, and then red, major refinements. Basically, there is no data about this currently. And I want to add a comment about the major refinements. So saying that there's no data is not necessarily something bad. It might also be that it's not relevant for that specific company. So it's, and as you can see here, 2 of the proxies were already covered. So for climate change, that's carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, most companies have come quite far in this area already. And then we also have the use of chemicals, which is reported quite well. And then there were 6 proxies where there was no applicable data at this point. And now I can't remember how many. 14 of the proxies require additional granularity, or they're measuring parts of the criteria, but they don't cover all of them. So the amount of work that's needed there varies quite a bit. But yeah, so there's some things that can be done here. Yeah, I think I'm like before my time, but then I have some last reflections. So this, what do you want to call it? This reporting tool that we defined, it does only cover the direct operation of the ICT companies and not scope 3, as you can translate it, even though we kind of fell into there sometimes and had to step back. So it will not cover the whole full picture, so more work is needed in order to capture that. And also, we did not try to downscale the planetary boundary framework onto a company level and be able to assign companies their fair share, because that's very difficult to do. The planetary boundaries are defined either at the global scale or at the regional one, and in order to do that, you would need to take into consideration social aspects, and that's a lot. So for now, I think it would be a good step to just start taking these planetary boundaries into consideration so that we can continue to exist together with all the Earth system processes in function. Yeah. It was a lot quicker.
Thank you very much. I think this was exciting and also a bit daunting, but amazing work. Have we maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, so that you also get the same kind of situation as the other ones, while you unplug, because we don't need to have that plugged in. Yes. Please state your name and your question.
Hi, so it's Isa from La Rochelle University. So you mentioned that proxies were not necessarily applicable to all the companies. Have you identified some kind of framework or I don't know, it's a type of methodology which would say which proxies are more applicable, or how companies can identify which ones are more relevant for themselves?
Well, so if you would have to study your operation quite a bit. For example, like the use of phosphorus, not perhaps every company does that. I know that Ericsson uses nitrogen, for example, but that not, yeah, so it's, I don't know, it's, you would have to do some sort of internal assessment on your own to know which ones are more applicable to you, and then choose the ones that you can benefit from the most. Yeah, the same goes for like restoration, for example. That's obviously not going to be applicable to every company. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. So
yeah, basically the companies have to decide themselves, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay. I'm actually going to give the word to the person next to the, yes, thank you. Because Mael, you're going to come up to the stage soon. So you're going to, yeah, exactly.
Pierre Rust, I work at Orange. I had a question. I was wondering how is your proposal different with what we already use when you do an LCA, these various impact criteria, and they look very similar to your proposal to me. What's...
Yeah, but I mean, an LCA, okay, but LCA to me is often products, and that's a lot in the scope 3. Yeah, and this would be, yeah, I guess you could combine them in some way, but it's, I'd say that this is on a larger scale than an LCA, unless you were to do it on like a full...
Yeah, but the criteria itself are quite the same. Of course, it's not a company-wide LCA, but the list of criteria looks the same to me.
Yeah.
Might be missing something, but...
Yeah, but also... LCA doesn't cover all of the planetary boundaries. I know that there have been attempts to do that. Pernilla Bergmark, for example, have looked into that a bit. Yeah, so I would say that they're supplementary rather than one or the other. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. A warm applause to Jennifer. You have to stay. You can leave your computer, and then you have to come up to this. So I'm inviting all the presenters. So Wilhelm Hast, Lea Mosesso, Mael Madon, and Jennifer Erlandsson to join me on the stage. And you have to be able to stand up now for like 20 minutes. Hope that will be okay. Daniel, could you give me, when it's 5 minutes left, So at 2025, I need to be stopped. Great. And you have one microphone to share. Yeah, great. So I asked you before we started this session to listen with attention and see if you would have an insight. So I actually would like you to comment, what do you think after you listen to these 3 papers that you didn't present yourself?
Oh, come on. Okay. First, I think it's very interesting because there were kind of different aspects of the same thing. Maybe the planetary boundary one was a bit different, but those 3 were kind of people's relationship somehow. I like to, for me, the notion of digital sufficiency and degrowth is almost similar in my head. I kind of merged them both. We could have more discussions. And I had already heard your talk and thought that it was also kind of closed way of seeing things. So I would say that my insights were that the methods and the way of approaching the concepts were similar. Sorry, that's not very high. But if anyone has better things to say.
I don't know if it's better, but it was very interesting to see that we go beyond just the GHG emissions and take into account a lot of other impacts.
Good. Over.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I don't know who scheduled this session, but they did a very good job, I think. You know, we went from a higher level to more concrete applications. And I really saw a lot of what I looked at during my thesis in these presentations. I mean, the smartphone example is one of the things that I pulled up the most because it's a very handy thing. And the planetary boundaries, I literally told the same fact about we transgressed more boundaries than the last time the paper was published during my thesis defense. And you know, the notion of sufficiency and degrowth are very closely related. This is not really adding anything to the discussion, but I just want to let you know that I fully agree that the concepts are very close. And I think if we all had more time to present, I mean, our points would probably very much converge. Given long enough. Maybe it'll take a couple hours. I don't know how long you have.
Oof. Yeah, all the presentations were really interesting, but I'm not sure I have anything to add, really. I feel like mine was a bit off, maybe, mostly, but yeah.
Yeah, I found they're really interesting, all of the presentations, so thank you very much. I actually want to bring in the audience because I know that there's I feel the energy. Yes, there's so many hands up. So we need someone to run around with a microphone again. I think actually Gersel was first up there. So state your name and then your question, please.
Thank you for the really interesting presentations. Hi, I'm Gazelle Shakiri. I'm from the University of Oldenburg. And just as Mael, I think, said, the first 3 presentations were about relationships of the human with the ICT and the economy with the ICT, as in there's always this human relationship in there, right? I mean, Willem was talking about techno-optimism and degrowth being negatively connotated. Leah was talking about user feelings, and then Mael was talking about people's perception and easy to use, and all of these very emotionally laden words. So my question now is, do we have to prioritize pleasure and joy and fun when we talk about ICT in the economy as well as in the personal space? Thank you.
No pressure.
Thank you for the question. I think for me, it's a question that I ask myself a lot. And I think it's very dangerous because digital technologies tend to be very fun. And I think, I mean, for me, it's a problem because I don't want to remove fun from people's life, but at the same time, you know, it's kind of sometimes very easy source of fun that you can have with like social media and the use of digital devices. Probably because of the, I don't know where Hugues is, but probably because of the whole business model that is behind. In my opinion, my personal opinion is that we should probably find other sources of fun somewhere else in the world, but still use ICT to kind of organize ourselves, but maybe not, but that's my personal opinion, maybe not find only joy in the usage of those devices. That's personal.
I agree with you, and I would say maybe we should bring more care, more than fun. It's like all relationships, so you have some parts that are fun, but you have also some parts that are less fun, and we have also to accept those less fun parts to be able to care for our devices and yeah, make them last longer and everything.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to see fun in context because there's different kinds of fun and people have fun doing different things. I mean, every individual is unique. Some people shoot elephants for fun and other people bounce around the ball. And I think they're extreme examples, I know. But I think it's important to look at what the externalities of that fun. And linking back to ICT, I think it's important to, and the keynote and the notion of digital reset, to rethink how we create fun through ICT, because fun in current contexts, as related to the big tech data model, the big tech business models, is definitely not sustainable. But I think it can be sustainable if done well from the ground up. And I think it's also important to do because, well, as I said, the techno-optimism, people are still really excited about technology. And if there were more sustainable ways to implement that technology in their life and have fun using that technology, I think they would be more likely to accept it.
Okay, so before we take another question, I'm going to ask you to, if you think it's fun to answer email, stand up. And if you think it's fun to discuss with other conference members around the coffees, please stand up. Brilliant. Now you get a little blood to your brain so you can continue for another 15 minutes here. Thank you very much for indulging me in standing up. No pressure. Yes, so let's take another question. Now we have one here. Please state your name and your question.
Srinjoy Mitra, University of Edinburgh. So I think one of you talked about working from home, remote working. I forgot. Yeah. So this is probably pushing you and others a bit more. So working from home really helped quite a lot of us, and we like to use it as something to show that that's really the way to go. But what do you think about the increased level of inequality that it created between what we see the haves and the have-nots of the society? Because before COVID, or right at the time of COVID, it was considered that, well, this is the complete disruption. Something will change in the society. But the key thing that happened that didn't change anything is because the white-collar jobs that you and I have, our lives didn't change at all. We could work from home. But the huge number of people who had to run all the businesses from where you still had to get all your food and everything, didn't have the possibility of working from home. And as you know, almost 19% of child poverty is still around 19% in Europe. So there's a huge inequality that increased further. because some of us could buffer ourselves from working from home. And do you think we are missing, I mean, it's something like this is creating this disconnect from us, for people like us, our white-collar workers, from the reality of the society, from working from home?
That was a very long question, but Mael, do you want to answer it? No.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of answer to give. I mean, I completely agree, and I hope that this work was not perceived as advocating work from home. I think indeed that ICT. I mean, in my head, ICT is always a tool. So you can have good usages and bad usages of them. And of course, yeah, well, I think it also increased inequalities in some sense. In particular, this example, I don't know if it's more, if it's bigger than all the other inequalities that are brought by ICT in many other ways. I mean, what I'm saying is, like, I don't know if this remote work is worse than any other inequalities brought by ICT, but it's one of them for sure.
I want to follow up that and ask a question to Jennifer, actually. Do you think it would be possible to extend your framework with also the donut, so the just space?
Yeah, so Future Earth published a paper in Nature last week. It was called something similar to a just and safe planetary boundaries. And that contains both like the environmental part, but they also defined it on a societal level with regionals and smaller, smaller scale boundaries. So yes, but it's tricky. Like every time you take something that's defined for one purpose and then try to apply it on another, it's tricky, but it's also important to try. Yeah. So,
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay, next question. Oh, there was a very quick hand up there. So keep your hand up until the mic reaches you. Thank you, and state your name and your question.
Mariangela Ferrario from Queen's University Belfast. I have a question actually specific for Leah, and it's around obsolescence. And the question is around, have you thought focusing perhaps on edge cases, the most vulnerable people affected by obsolescence? And I'll give you an example. The only reason why I changed my phone was because I needed to get indefinite leave to stay in the UK, and my phone was too old to get to the app. I was lucky because I was quick and I had the money to do that, but not everybody can do it. So my question is, have you perhaps considered to really start looking at the impact of obsolescence on the most vulnerable?
So I would love to redo the same study with another population that responds to your question. I didn't have the opportunity to do it with this study, but it would be very, very interesting to do it. All I saw in this study is to identify the dependencies of people with their smartphones, and there's quite a few, but like transport, banks, and message. So I think it's the kind of the same dependencies for everyone, and then the persons I interviewed were able to change their phone when they had to. So yeah, it would be very interesting to see how people do it when they can't change their smartphones.
Thank you. We have one more dear close. I wonder if we need to then send the student volunteer, whose name I don't really know yet, to this side, because there's like so many questions on that side, but not so many here. But first, please state your name and the question.
Thank you, Vlad Korama, TU Berlin. So it's a question to all of you. One of the problems when working with ICT and the environment or society is the utter dynamicity of the field, which makes us always be like a step beyond whether we do an LCA, an ex post LCA, or many other aspects, also understanding societal aspects. And now we've heard a lot about sufficiency also this morning in the video context, but and this was for the last 10, 15 years. Before that was, peer-to-peer. I would argue the next one is artificial intelligence and all the traffic that it will generate and data center and so on. How would you apply sufficiency principles to AI now at an early stage, ex ante, while we don't know yet what its benefits might be, what its dangers might be? How can we, balance sufficiency with not suffocating its potential?
That was a hard question, Vlad.
Yeah, I'll take the heat off my fellow panel members there. Well, I think it's very important to already look at what is being done with current AI technology and put a hard cap on it, so to speak. While it's very interesting technology, and I think it can definitely be used to do a lot of good, I think we need to be very fast to eliminate early adopter advantages when looking at like generative AI and such. People are using it and going to use it to make a lot of money and grow a lot. And I don't constantly want to be capitalism, but I'm gonna. And so I think it is very important to already think about what are we not going to use those hyper advanced AI for, and just not doing it. I mean, I think it's very hard for someone from the research community to say, walk up to someone from OpenAI and say, stop it. But someone has to be the first, I guess. Because, I read an article on this recently. Training a ChatGPT version is a power consumption that's measured in the megawatts. So it's completely defeating the purpose of greening IT if we're thinking of a solution that just requires way more solar power than we can manage even from many data centers. So I think we should already be looking at what useful and sufficient usage of such an AI would be and what wouldn't be.
Yeah, to add up to that, I remember when starting thinking about digital sufficiency, I started with just sufficiency as a whole, and there are some work on that. So depart from the needs. And the thing is, I remember a paper, for example, that were trying to define, now I don't remember the framework, but like needs of a human being. So you have eating, sorry? No, it was not Maslow's. Anyway, but okay, well, and then so having those needs, and then if you look at this, ICT comes in one of those pillars. It's communicating. That was identified as a kind of essential human need. And then you can use ICT, you can use all the things. ICT has kind of is acting now in all of those needs. Anyway, then they were trying from every of those needs to quantify how much is needed. For example, the need of eating. Okay, how many calories do we need per day? This is easy, easy to do. But then communicating, quantifying that is a bit more difficult. But just to say that I think that digital sufficiency, at least the principles, are actually tackling that as well, in the sense of kind of foreseeing the need of people, and so lastly, I think that the new technologies, like the new innovations that are brought, do not cover needs but create new needs. And they actually, in that paper, make a difference between needs and needs satisfiers. So you have your needs, and then you have many ways to satisfy them. And we talked about fun. You have many ways to satisfy this need. Eating, many ways. And same in AI comes with the need of whatever, finding your path. You can use AI, you can use other things, but it's the need satisfiers. And sometimes I think, companies kind of market need satisfiers as need, and they kind of mix the two.
Thank you. We have one question in the middle, and then we need to do like a summing up. Could you just step a little bit further, because you're all very green? Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to Colors. Yes, we have one more question.
Hi, I'm Ainara Soldier from INRIA. I have a question. I will start at the point of view that degrowth is a societal question and not specific to IT sector or computer science. So it's like now we just discover, and it's great, how economical growth impacts or is a part or is helped by all sectors, including ICT. So I will take an example from the presentation of Maël. So when I heard your presentation, thank you for this one. So it was really, really good. But I see a problem on the management side. So it seems that if some manager it seems that it's just that some manager takes advantage of the technologies to track their employees. So if you take the problem at the root, the problem it's not that technologies help So I take it back. So if we take the problem at the root, the challenge here is to change the management method and not changing the software, because it may be just a superficial change. If you do that, there may be less IT environmental impacts, but the pressure will stay with other means. So that was my opinion. So I have a general question for you. How do you link this societal intrication between degrowth and ICT in IT-centric work? So it's not how ICT can help the degrowth, but where ICT issues in degrowth hide societal consequences and implication.
So
Pass the mic to the degrowth person.
Yeah, pass the mic to the degrowth person, yeah. Well, I think, well, first of all, a lot more research could be done on this. We have some research in the pipeline, as I mentioned, that really looks at degrowth and ICT research and defines concepts from those fields and tries to unite them in a framework. But well, what I think is that the way in which degrowth or ICT can be used to implement degrowth in other sectors should necessarily also mean that we degrow the amount of ICT we use. It goes hand in hand. It's very difficult. It'll probably cost a lot of smart people a lot of hours to think of how we're going to do this. But I feel it's important to look at both sides at the same time. It's both bottom up and top down and left right and right left. It's a question of degrowth by ICT and degrowth of ICT. Now, how exactly we're going to achieve the degrowth of ICT, that is a very difficult one to answer. I mean, the concepts of low technology solutions come into view. Why fix something with a high technology, high-tech solution if you can fix it with a low-tech solution? The concept of conviviality, designing tools for people and not for managers come into view. There's really quite a lot of ideas that we can use for this, but it'll require quite a lot more work, I'm afraid.
Thank you. We're going to do a round up now just so that you can have lunch. I think that's very important. And you've been amazing. So a warm applause to yourself for listening for this long. So a warm applause. And a warm applause for the panel. And Especially warm applause for Soha, who has been running around with the microphone. Thank you. I think you did excellently. I'm very proud of you all. A little bit extra of Mael because he used to be my student. But I don't have favorites. And then I'm going to hand over to Daniel because you wanted to say something about the next session. Yes. So thank you. You are free to leave.
I just want to say that the next session after lunch is here at 2 o'clock. So that's for all of the audience. But also, there are several authors of several of the papers. So if someone who will present after lunch happens to be here right now, it would be great if you could just come forward when we all leave and just so we can meet. So thank you.
Lunch! Yay!